Hello and thanks for joining us for France in Focus. This week we're in the forest of Compiègne, about 80 kilometers northeast of Paris, because it was exactly here, 100 years ago, that the Armistice was signed, marking the end of combat in the First World War. Picture the scene. Two trains opposite each other, one carrying a Franco-British delegation, the other carrying the German delegation, who negotiated for 3 days before the Armistice was signed. It was a war that lasted more than 4 years and in which 9 million soldiers and 7 million civilians lost their lives. Well, we're going to start by taking a closer look at the events which led to Germany's defeat.
A short war and a quick victory. That was the promise of Emperor Wilhelm II in 1914. But overconfidence on the part of the German army's Prussian leaders would quickly prove imprudent. Before focusing on the Eastern Front, troops planned to conquer France, expecting a repeat of the easy triumph of 1870.
The Schlieffen Plan failed primarily because it largely depended on the notion that France was weak and that the country was in a state of decay, while Germany had the upper hand, what with its demographic and economic boom.
But sending soldiers to Paris on foot leaves German troops exhausted and the army's forces depleted. In September, the French win the Battle of the Marne. Then, by invading neutral Belgium, Germany precipitates British involvement in the war. As a result, the country finds itself surrounded by enemies, and the ensuing blockade throttles the German economy. In Berlin, the military leadership reacts by launching the submarine Battle of the Atlantic, with the aim of disrupting shipping routes between Britain and the US.
The main issue with this all-out submarine warfare is that it basically led to the US joining the war. Germany knew the risk, but thought it could play for time, as the US Army wasn't operational.
The pullout of Russia in 1917 offers Germany some respite, but the country's military chiefs need to act quickly before the balance of power swings irretrievably in the Allies' favour. In effect, 900,000 German soldiers die in the first 6 months of 1918. Meanwhile, the same number of American troops land in France.
With the offensives of 1918, Germany is clearly playing its last card. If it fails, then defeat will be inevitable.
By the end of the summer, Marshal Hindenburg and General Ludendorff had accepted that the war was lost and asked to negotiate an armistice. But while the two are credited with bringing the conflict to an end, they also promoted a dangerous narrative that the army was betrayed by Germany's new civilian government following the emperor's abdication. The so-called stab-in-the-back myth would go on to become a powerful propaganda tool and a cornerstone of the Nazis' anti-Semitic rhetoric.
It was on a railway carriage, just like this one at the Armistice Museum in Compiègne, that the ceasefire was signed. And it came into effect at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. Well, to tell us more, we're joined now by Bernard Le Temps, who is the president of the Association of the Armistice Memorial. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Why was the ceasefire signed on a railway carriage in the middle of a forest? Why here and why the secrecy?
Marshal Ferdinand Foch's headquarters were in Senlis. Senlis was occupied by the Germans in 1914. They had executed the town's mayor, Eugène Audin. They had set fire to 2 of the town's main streets, as well as the train station. So Marshal Foch wanted the armistice deal to be signed well away from the public eye, to keep it secret.
And tell us a bit about what the atmosphere was like during those talks.
The atmosphere was civil, but not friendly. They were all high-ranking military officers. There were no handshakes, but it was all very civil, polite, but that's all.
It's not a coincidence, is it, that 22 years after the armistice was signed, the French and the Germans found themselves sitting opposite each other at the same table, in the same railway carriage, in the same forest?
Chancellor Adolf Hitler wanted revenge. He wanted to show that he had won, that he had washed the stain of defeat from the German army. He did just that on June 25th when he sent a small postcard to every German soldier saying, "The honor of the German army has been restored." So Hitler ensured the train carriage was recovered and placed in a field. He then sat on Marshal Foch's chair in that very carriage and had General Heinrich Kittel read him the terms of the armistice. The deal was signed on June 22nd. It was Hitler's victory. He'd come back to the exact same spot where the armistice deal was signed in 1918, but this time it was France who had surrendered.
Just to be clear, this is like the railway carriage where the armistice was signed, but it isn't the actual carriage. What happened to that?
The original carriage was lost in Krawinkel in 1945. It was exhibited in Berlin between 1940 and 1942 before being burned in a fire started by Ohrdruf concentration camp prisoners. All of the carriage went up in flames except for the metallic frame, which was salvaged and used for another 30 years in Gotha. The very carriage we're standing in belongs to the same series as the original one. It was given a license to operate in June 1914. This carriage is number 2439. The original one was number 2419D.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Bernard Leton, the president of the Association of the Armistice Memorial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So that was the formal end of the First World War. We're now a few kilometers away from Compiègne to take a closer look at what the armistice meant from the soldiers' perspective, which brings us to this old quarry where some of the regiments of the French army were based. Well, here to show us round is Corentin Houchet. Corentin, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Just start by telling us, if you will, who was based here?
We're here in a French army billet. Most of the time, the front was about 2 kilometers away. Soldiers used to come here to get some rest and to hide from the shelling, but also to seek shelter from the cold, the rain, and all the bad weather.
Corentin, tell us, what was the reality of daily life like for soldiers living here?
This was a quarry where everyone regrouped and rested. Soldiers would come back from the front, and several hundred of them would sleep here on bunk beds. There were kitchens and stoves where soldiers could cook for themselves. But there were also workshops where soldiers would make barbed wire or build wooden structures to reinforce the trenches when they would return to the front. There were also places of worship and a hospital. Commanding this quarry required having a command post, and there are still clues lying around that suggest this was an important centre of communication. There's an inscription here that says telephoniste or telephone operator. There was a phone set up here that allowed soldiers to communicate with officers outside the combat zone, with other command posts, and with soldiers inside the trenches. It reduced response times and enabled officers to issue orders that were as swift and reliable as possible.
Okay, so they had a telephone here. And how did they react when they found out that the armistice had been agreed?
So there was a mix of shock and suspicion. It wasn't the first time that soldiers had heard rumours of a possible armistice deal. But on November the 11th, when the phone rang, soldiers received very precise orders explaining that there would be a ceasefire at 11 a.m. and that the war was over. The men were overwhelmed with joy, but also by bitterness, because they saw firsthand the price they had paid for that victory.
Okay, well, thank you so much for speaking to us. Corentin Houchet, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, every year, Remembrance Day's events are held right across the globe. And this year, of course, being the centenary, they're going to have particular significance. We're going to take a closer look now and see what's in store in France and in Germany.
Das ist immer das Hauptthema in den Schützengräben nach Urlaub.
At the Hartmann-Villers-Kopf Memorial, French and German soldiers answer one another. A cruel battle was fought here a century ago, crushing a whole generation of men from both countries. This is also where former President Hollande decided to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I. Today, the mountain is described as having literally devoured men. People come here to hike, but also to remember the past.
One of my great-uncles fought here in the Vosges Mountains. He had a little girl, but never met her. She was born in 1917, and he died in 1918.
More than 2 million Germans died in World War I. Yet this great war is little remembered by Germans, many of whom shudder at the memories of Imperial Germany.
People are forgetting about it. Those who are specialized in studying it know a lot about it, but in general, in Germany, no one really cares.
100 kilometers away is Strasbourg, the capital of the French border region of Alsace. Here, road signs are translated in both languages, as the region passed between French and German control multiple times in the past. Today, the memory of the November 11th armistice is still very vivid in people's minds.
One of my grandmothers was born in 1901. She had a German ID card, and in 1918 she became French again after France was liberated.
It's the story of my family, the story of my grandfather. On his deathbed, instead of telling my grandmother he loved her, and God knows he did, he said, "Always remember that our girls are French."
French and Germans have very different ways of dealing with the memory of World War I, but that could be changing.
All of Europe is interested in World War I, except for Germany, because it lost the war. However, in 2014, many people started looking into it, debating on what triggered it. A lot more Germans are also interested in what happened to their families. The French are much more interested in genealogy.
Today, the common and well-alive memory of this bloody conflict pushes Europeans to meditate on peace, fraternity, and hope.
Well, we end this edition on one of the battlefields in the region, on this, the centenary of the Armistice. Thank you very much indeed for watching. See you again soon here on France 24.
Two years after Donald Trump's surprise victory in the US elections, the midterms have become a referendum on both the man and his policies. Will Trump's Republican Party win even more seats in Congress? Or can the Democrats make up ground on the GOP, especially in the House of Representatives? Get election results as they come in from our correspondents in Washington, starting 3 a.m. Paris time. Stay tuned to on-the-spot analysis by our reporters in key states across the US. Don't miss this special edition, US midterm elections, all night long on France 24 and France24.com.